As we go on today, we're just continuing on in Mark chapter 9. And of course, Mark chapter 9 begins with the Transfiguration. And then they come down, and the disciples and the scribes and the people are arguing about the being unable to heal the boy with the evil spirit. And then they continue their journey, which is where we pick up in verses 30 and 32. Then they left that place and made their way through Galilee, but he did not want anyone to know it. Or he was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after he is killed, he will rise 3 days later." But they did not understand this statement, and they were afraid to ask him. Now, if you only had X number of days to live, you would want to make the most of that time that you have left. You would decide what is important and you would share it with those around you. And Jesus knows his time is short. And so he's moving through the region specifically to teach his disciples and to show them what God was all about. And he wanted to avoid the crowds and distractions. But in verse 32, he begins talking about betrayal. He talks about his death and his resurrection 3 days later. Now, I'm sure they knew about betrayal, just like we do. And the death part, they understood. They had seen Roman crucifixions. But the last part of verse 32, it says they were afraid to ask him. They didn't understand and they were afraid to ask him. About the rising 3 days later. Lazarus has not died yet or been raised. So they didn't understand the statement. But they should have asked so they could understand what Jesus was saying. And the lesson here for us is if we don't understand something, we need to ask because maybe it's important. And this was an important truth that Jesus was trying to teach them. And then in verse 33 it says, they came to a house, and then they came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" Disciples argued a lot, it seems. Guess what? They're just like us. We argue. We argue about politics. We argue about sports teams. We argue about cars. We argue about churches. I mean, we just argue. It's part of the fallen human nature. And so they're walking along and they're having this argument. And they come to this house, and tradition says it was Simon Peter's house. And we know Jesus made the difficult statement earlier in verses 30 through 32. None of them understood it. None of them asked. And you would think it would lead to a discussion. Maybe even an argument. But the 3 days mystery was not what they were discussing. Jesus asked them, what were you discussing? But they weren't discussing, they were arguing. They were probably even doing a little bit of bragging and boasting. And in verse 34 it says this, but they were silent because on the way, or on the path, or on the journey, they had been arguing with one another about who was the greatest. Mark says they didn't answer him. They didn't answer because they were ashamed. You ever catch a kid doing something wrong? You ask them, what are you doing? They don't answer you. They just put their head down and they know they're caught, they're busted, but you know what was going on. And they thought as long as Jesus didn't know what they were discussing, it seemed reasonable to them until he called them on it, and then they were silent. Now, if they've been discussing on how to have a better prayer life or how to serve God better, they would have been eager to tell Jesus all about it. They would have said, Lord, we had the greatest discussion. Now we know how to pray better. We know how to serve you more completely. They would have been all out to tell Jesus about it. But they kept silent because they had argued about who was the greatest among them. And why were they arguing about it? Well, they knew that Jesus was the Messiah. That they were seeing him in a new light, in a new way, and they anticipated him fulfilling the Old Testament prophecies and free Israel from Roman occupation and Roman rule. He would sit on the throne of David. It would be King Jesus. Sort of like the election we saw, everybody wants a place in the administration. Well, everybody wanted a place in Jesus' kingdom, and they wanted the important places, the powerful places. But they kept silent because that's what they had been arguing about when Jesus asked the question. And so this becomes a teaching moment for two reasons. The first part, because they needed to learn that they had to ask questions about the parts that they didn't understand. And the second thing is, they learned that they were getting off track about their place in the kingdom. And it shows them and us how we should be Christ followers, how we should follow that role in the kingdom. And so in verse 35 it says, he called them, sitting down, he called the 12 and said to them, if anyone wants to be first, he must be last of all and a servant of all. So if you want to be first, you need to be last. Talk about a place where you need to ask questions. You want to be first, you need to be last. And you need to be a servant of all. See, greatness is not found in the gifts or abilities that God has given you. It is not found in the things that you witness or who you know who is rich and powerful. It is found in having the right attitude and action. In verse 36 it says, "Then he took a child and had him stand among them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them." See, Jesus has an instant object lesson here. And the object is a real live child. Now you've probably heard that old proverb. You may have even said it. Children should be seen and not heard. And I'm not even sure that that society wanted children to be seen. But it's the complete opposite in today's society. Parents indulge their children. Too many adults' worlds revolve around their children. And it's creating problems. Read the newspaper, read online, watch the news. Back in 2005, the Associated Press Ipsos poll found that nearly 70% of Americans said, I'll get this right in a moment. The Associated Press Ipsos poll said that 70% of Americans said they believe that people are ruder now than they were 20 or 30 years ago. And that children are among the worst offenders. As annoyances, they tied with obnoxious cell phone users. So, children, cell phone users, tied as far as being obnoxious or rude. And I'm sure people would say now that it's even worse. And in 2002, only 9% of adults were able to say that the children they saw in public were respectful towards adults. According to surveys done by the Public Agenda, a nonpartisan, nonprofit public opinion group. See, we have an obligation to teach children that when they grow up, that they will be respectful adults. And we need to teach them the ways of the Bible and Jesus. And it's not the kids that are out of control. You know, we blame kids when they're running around and they're yelling and doing things that they shouldn't do, but it's really the parents in most cases. They're copying what their parents model or don't model for them. You know, more kids need more time with their parents, and they need godly examples. They need discipline and they need restraint. And I want to tell you, we have some really great kids here. And that is because of their parents, because they put effort, time and effort into it, and we have some really great kids here. Verse 37, whoever welcomes One little child such as this in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but him who sent me. See, the great thing about children is they see things in new ways. In fact, a lot of what they see, they're seeing it for the first time. And so they see it in a new way, different from the way that we do. They accept things at face value. They have imagination, they have ability, they have a willingness to try, to do different things. Probably a lot of things that they shouldn't do. The only thing they probably don't like to try as far as new things are new foods like broccoli with cheese and that kind of stuff. And Jesus is not saying don't ignore or overlook human behavior in children. He's saying that we are to relate to the least important people in society at all levels, from children to adults. We are to relate to them like a child does. Children don't see handicaps. They don't see deformities. They don't see a homeless person. They don't even see a vicious dog. They just see a dog. And it's not about the service performed. It's the attitude in which we do it, in which we approach it. See, Jesus was a servant to all. And to do the same, we must humble ourselves to become servants to others. We must have a humble attitude that the least and the lowly are just as important as anybody else and worthy of our consideration. So what is greatness? True greatness is to be found in service, in a concern for others, willing even to be last, instead of always putting yourself first. This is contrary to what the world tells us. The world says that greatness is measured by how many people serve you. Greatness, according to the world, is measured by the number of lives that you control. But Jesus says true greatness is measured by how many people you help. That is, by how many people you serve along the way. Why did Jesus use a child as an object lesson? Someone said that Jesus used a child because a child really can't do anything for us. A child can't increase our position in society. A child can't add to our success. On the contrary, a child demands things. And by taking this child in his arms, Jesus is saying to his disciples and us, if you really want to be great, here's what you have to do. Welcome one of these children in my name. And when you do it, you're welcoming me. And not just me, but the one, God the Father, who sent me. So what does being a servant mean? It means that we must have action. James writes this. He says, if a brother or sister is without clothes and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm, and eat well, but you don't give them what the body needs, what good is it? See, being a servant means that we actually have to do something. We have to do it in Christian love and service. See, it's one thing to say that we support one another in church or will pray for others. However, it's totally something else to actually go and do the service. We can talk about it all day, how we love people and how we want to be loved. But talk is meaningless unless it's supported by some action. And Frank Craddock, a preacher, in a message to pastors, said this. He said, to give my life for Christ appears glorious, he said. To pour myself out for others, to pay the ultimate price of martyrdom, I'll do it. I'm ready, Lord, to go out in a blaze of glory. So he says we think of our giving, of our all to the Lord, is like taking out $1,000 bill and laying it on the table and saying, here, Lord, I'm giving it all. And so we're done and we're committed to the Lord. But he says the reality of living as a servant of Christ must be this. You go to the bank and you take that $1,000 and you exchange it for quarters. And you give out 25 cents here and 50 cents there. You listen to the neighbor's kid. Instead of saying, get lost, you repair and help the elderly widow or friend. We listen, we pray, we make ourselves available. We should be living out our servanthood bit by bit. We could do one big thing and be done. That's putting the $1,000 on the table. But it's much harder to live each day doing acts of love 25 cents at a time. Mark Buchanan writes in his book, Is Your God Too Safe? He talks about Lorne Sanny, who was founder of the Navigators, and was once asked how you could tell if you were really a servant. He said, by how you act. When you are treated like one. If I'm going to be your servant, the last thing I really want is to think I'm a servant. I really want to impress you with how humble I am. So if you want to be a servant, you do it by being humble and being a servant. Jesus said this in Matthew's Gospel. Matthew chapter 25, verses 35 through 40. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or without clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, I assure you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. See, by serving others, we show that we love Jesus. Jim Elliot, shortly before he was martyred by the Auca Indians, said this: "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose." He is no fool to give what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. You can read about Jim in Elizabeth Elliot's 1957 bestseller, Through the Gates of Splendor. It was also recently, about 10 years ago, made into a movie. See, we lose nothing by serving. We lose nothing by being humble. But we gain everything kingdom related. And we gain all the riches that go along with the kingdom. If we serve, we remain humble. If we become fully devoted Christ followers. And we get to show the love of Christ to others by becoming like a little child and obeying Jesus. And only by doing that will we become known as the greatest. Not here on earth, but the greatest in the kingdom of Jesus. Amen. Our closing hymn is number 452, My Savior's Love. Would you please stand, number 452.